The ground doesn't ask permission before it moves. One moment, camp is silent. The next, the earth itself is shaking beneath your feet, hard enough to knock you down, loud enough to sound like the world is tearing open. Trees sway without wind. Stone structures crack and collapse. And there is nowhere to run, because the danger isn't in one direction. It's underneath you. For ancient humans, with no understanding of tectonic plates, no warning systems, and no scientific explanation for what was happening, an earthquake wasn't just terrifying. It was one of the most incomprehensible disasters a person could experience. So how did ancient civilizations survive it, explain it, and in some remarkable cases, actually engineer around it? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how humans responded to one of nature's most sudden and unpredictable threats, long before anyone knew what caused it. Without any scientific framework, nearly every ancient culture reached for the same solution: myth. And the sheer variety of these explanations, all trying to make sense of the exact same physical event, is genuinely fascinating. In Japanese folklore, earthquakes were blamed on Namazu, a giant catfish said to live beneath the islands, restrained by a god pressing down on it with a massive stone. When the god's attention wandered, the catfish would thrash, and the ground would shake. In parts of ancient India, some traditions describe the earth as balanced on the backs of massive elephants, with tremors occurring whenever one shifted its weight. Norse mythology tied earthquakes to Loki, bound beneath the earth as punishment, with tremors explained as his violent attempts to break free. And in the Americas, some indigenous traditions describe a great turtle carrying the world on its back, with earthquakes occurring whenever it moved. Ancient Greece had its own explanation, tied directly to one of its most powerful gods. Poseidon, ruler of the sea, was also known specifically as the Earth Shaker, believed to strike the ground with his trident when angered, splitting rock and toppling buildings. Entire temples were built in his honor, partly out of genuine practical hope, an attempt to keep the god calm enough not to shake the very foundation the temple stood on. Different continents, completely disconnected from each other, all reaching for remarkably similar explanations. Something enormous, alive, and restrained, shifting beneath the surface of the world. It's a striking example of how consistently human minds try to explain the unexplainable, using the same basic shape of story. Interestingly, not every ancient thinker stopped at mythology. The Greek philosopher Aristotle proposed one of the earliest recorded natural explanations for earthquakes, suggesting they were caused by underground winds, trapped air, forcing its way violently through hidden channels beneath the earth. It was wrong, but it mattered enormously as a historical moment, an attempt to explain a terrifying natural event through physical cause and effect rather than divine anger, centuries before anything resembling modern geology existed. But mythology and early philosophy aside, some ancient civilizations moved well beyond storytelling and into genuine, practical science. In the year 132, a Chinese polymath named Zheng Heng invented what's widely considered the world's first seismoscope, an intricate bronze vessel surrounded by 8 dragon heads, each holding a small ball in its mouth. When an earthquake occurred, even one far too distant to be felt directly at the device's location, internal mechanisms would trigger the appropriate dragon to drop its ball into a waiting bronze frog below, indicating both that a quake had happened and roughly which direction it came from. Historical records describe this device successfully detecting a distant earthquake that hadn't yet been reported by messenger, a genuinely stunning achievement built almost 2,000 years before modern seismology existed. Architecture, in earthquake-prone regions, evolved specifically to survive what mythology couldn't prevent. Japan, sitting directly along one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, developed pagoda architecture with a remarkable engineering secret: a central wooden pillar, called a shinbashira, running through the core of the structure, not rigidly connected to the surrounding floors, but designed to move somewhat independently. During an earthquake, this allowed the different levels of the pagoda to sway slightly out of sync with each other, absorbing and dissipating seismic energy instead of resisting it directly. It's a similar principle to modern earthquake engineering, developed centuries before anyone understood the physics behind why it worked. Some of these wooden pagodas have survived major earthquakes for well over 1,000 years, still standing today. High in the Andes, Incan builders developed a completely different, but equally sophisticated, solution: precision-cut stone construction called ashlar masonry. Massive stones were carved and fitted together with such extraordinary precision that no mortar was needed at all, and remarkably, this technique gave structures like Machu Picchu genuine flexibility during seismic activity. Rather than shattering under stress like a rigidly mortared wall might, the tightly interlocked stones could shift slightly and resettle back into place. a technique that modern engineers studying the site have specifically praised for its earthquake resilience, again, achieved centuries before anyone understood plate tectonics. Elsewhere in the Andes, builders developed another remarkably effective technique called quincha, walls constructed from a lightweight woven cane lattice coated with mud and plaster rather than solid heavy stone or brick. Because the structure was inherently lighter and more flexible than rigid masonry, quincha buildings could bend and absorb seismic movement instead of collapsing outright, a technique still used and respected in earthquake-resistant construction across parts of South America today. Ancient Rome contributed its own innovation, somewhat by accident. Roman concrete, combined with the widespread use of arches and domes, distributed structural weight far more efficiently than solid stone block construction, and some historians studying earthquake damage patterns across the Roman world note that certain concrete and arch-based structures fared notably better during seismic events than more rigid stone buildings nearby, likely due to how weight and stress were distributed throughout the curved structure rather than concentrated at rigid joints. Beyond buildings, some cultures developed an entirely different kind of earthquake technology, memory itself, deliberately preserved across generations. Along the coast of Japan, after devastating tsunamis frequently triggered by major earthquakes, communities began placing stone markers, some centuries old, inscribed with warnings not to build homes below that specific point, a direct physical message from ancestors to descendants about where the water had reached before. Remarkably, in the aftermath of major modern tsunamis, some villages that respected these ancient stone warnings avoided the worst of the destruction entirely, while nearby areas that had built below the markers suffered catastrophic losses. A strikingly similar pattern exists among indigenous communities along the Pacific Northwest coast of North America, where oral traditions passed down for generations describe a catastrophic earthquake and tsunami, a story modern geological research has since confirmed actually occurred around the year 1700, matching physical evidence found in the region's soil layers with remarkable precision. In both cases, oceans apart, cultures with no contact whatsoever independently arrived at the same solution, turning a single catastrophic event into permanent, transmittable memory, specifically to protect people who hadn't been born yet. Archaeological evidence also shows the very real, very destructive side of ancient earthquakes. Researchers studying the decline of the Minoan civilization on Crete have found extensive evidence suggesting a significant earthquake, or series of earthquakes, contributed to weakening a once powerful society, damaging infrastructure, and disrupting trade at a critical, vulnerable moment in its history. And famously, the city of Pompeii experienced a serious earthquake roughly 17 years before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, with damaged buildings still being repaired at the time the volcano finally erupted, meaning some residents were already living through the aftermath of one disaster when a second, far more catastrophic one arrived. Immediate earthquake response in the ancient world, without modern emergency services, relied heavily on community structure. Survivors dug through rubble by hand, often within minutes, since search windows for finding people alive were understood, even without formal training. To be short, communal recovery efforts, rebuilding shelters, redistributing food and resources among survivors, and caring for the injured, fell to the same tight social bonds that helped ancient communities survive nearly every other hardship covered on this channel. So, surviving an earthquake in the ancient world required an unusual combination: mythology to make an incomprehensible event emotionally bearable, remarkably advanced engineering in multiple, completely disconnected civilizations that genuinely rivals modern earthquake-resistant design, and a deliberate, sometimes centuries-long effort to turn disaster into memory, passed forward specifically to protect people who weren't alive yet to witness the original event.